Hello everyone and welcome back to my studio. Today I'm painting some yellow flowers. I call them golden balls. I don't know what exactly they're called, but they are really like fluffy. Sometimes they remind chrysanthemums, but they're not quite chrysanthemums. There's some kind of cross between chrysanthemums and I would say even dahlias, because they have very like separated petals. Anyway, I will try to combine those petals and paint them as golden balls and maybe just show certain petals that in the light. So this time I decided to save some time again, and I prepared my drawing and I did a little bit of the jug that I'm painting. So I'll explain what I did so far. So I use this big bristle brush. It's number 10 series. I forgot, I don't know what brand it is. I think it's I can't remember what it is. I have lots of these brands. Maybe I can read it here. Unfortunately they all wiped. I'll try to find it later. So anyway, I use this big bristle brush and I roughly blocked in some of the background tabletop, and I started doing my vase. So the vase is very interesting color. It's kind of grayish and darker. When I post the photo you will see the colors. So what I was using for here, it's almost looks like black, but really if you look a little further with more attention, it's dark blue color. So I used Prussian blue, and then I used some yellow ochre, some transparent red oxide, and some transparent red oxide and raw umber, and then I was adding a little bit of white in some areas. So it's more gray and lighter on top and darker here. So I was going to show you that how I do highlights on this. So highlights, again, it's not a pure white, it's just a tint of, I'm using a smaller brush, it's tint of blue on it. So but it's a thicker paint and it sits on top, and I have two smaller ones here and one little here. And then I'm going to just slightly modify this one. So the highlight goes from the window that I have. I have a stable daylight because we have a little bit of smoke here, so that helps me to have no sunshine. And then I do a little bit of lighter. Normally where highlight sits there is a lighter area, so I'm not going to overdo that area, just a little bit lighter, especially where these two bigger highlights sit. It's very dark and there is lots of reflected light as well. So again, with the reflected light, the main thing not to overdo. So I'm just putting tiny bits here, because if you overdo it becomes, it's losing its shape, so it's better not to put as many highlights and lights. It's a highly reflective glass, so it's a ceramic jug, but again, like I said, I have to be kind of, I have to try and see what works, I guess. So sometimes certain things work and sometimes certain things don't work as good. As long as you can keep the shape, that's the main thing. So in this case I just have to slightly modify it, but not too much. That's why I kind of making it smudgy. Like I had some tiny highlights there, but I think it's kind of holding the shape right now. I'm saying kind of because I may have a look one more time and see what else can be modified. So there are kind of little stripes going through here, but don't want those stripes to overpower what I'm doing. And again, in the shadow part there is some reflected light from background. Normally there is tendency to make it bright when you squint it's very, very dark. So I'm trying to squint a lot on the shape to simplify it. When you squint, all of this looks very, very dark. So that's what I'm going to do now, just add a little bit of darkness here. Can always make it lighter. It's much easier to make it lighter than make it darker. So, and again, once it's overworked, it's hard to lay the paint on, so just try to be mindful of each brush stroke you're making, and I'm trying to be mindful. So squinting a little more and adding a little bit more darkness to my jug. So I'm just going to be silent for a short while, just to focus on the shape of the jug, and then I'll go further to the flowers. I say the best for the last. Yeah, those highlights much darker once I squint. That's the benefit of squinting. And of course I will do the handle later. I did some background already around it. So, and I'm working with a smaller brush. It's a synthetic brush using Prussian blue, and actually I had burnt sienna there, so this synthetic brush holds shape quite well. So I think I a little bit overdid it. I'm going to use some my background color to correct the shape. And I'm washing my brush in solution that I normally use. It's either Gamsol or other alternative, the one that it's paint thinner. And again, using my background on the other side, it's a little bit thinner. Plus, once I start doing more of background, I may correct it one more time. But at this point, I'm not going to spend time on the handle. I'm going to move forward with it. So there is a slightly darker shadow here, and there is slightly darker shadow. Once I start painting flowers, you will see that it's kind of it's darker than in the area where the flowers are hanging. So just going to bear with me. Bear with me until I do the shadows, because I have this paint on my brush now. Okay, so I'm going to put this small one down, wash it well, because I will use it again for other paints. One thing with this Prussian blue, it's almost like a nuclear, I call it nuclear, very, very bright. So I have to be careful to wash, but I think I will neutralize it with the paints I'm going to use further. So I'm starting on my flowers, so I can see. So this is a mixture of yellow ochre, cadmium yellow deep, and touch of terra rosa. So I made it very warm, because that's how I see it, very warm in middle of this flower, under here. So right now I'm painting them as balls, like I said. See touch of green. Where I see touch of green, I used a little bit of still very warm but green. I used what is called chromium. Yes, I thought I would use viridian, but then I had from my plain hair painting some chrome, so I thought, oh, may as well use it. So especially that there were some greens here, so it's kind of like this. Used my so brighter here in this area. Again, not doing all the brightness yet, just going with the slightly reserved brightness, because that can be added later. So using more even transparent oxide red, I added a little bit on this one, just adding a little bit more darkness and green, dark green, dark brown, especially here. Maybe a little bit of terra rosa as well. So kind of looking at the temperature and value at the same time. So there are some flower, there is flower down there, but it's, oh, that's a little bit too much. So it's a little bit further there, and don't see that well. So my central flower potentially I think is going to be this one. So I'm looking at shape of this one, and then adding bright yellow as well that I see. There is flower at the back, that's the flower that mostly not blooming to the full yet, because before it opens completely it's kind of holding a different shape, smaller flowers. So that's one of the background, I think, the one that a little greener and a little smaller yet. But I will add a little bit of yellow to the back of it, just a little bit of ochre, and it's kind of has more yellow, bright yellow, very light yellow in it. So then I'm going through each flower without worrying too much about the detail, just going through each flower just to see. Some of them will have more detail and some of them might not have much detail, depending on the flower and how it will look in the final. So it's another big flower, but it's kind of receding further, so that's why it's more like kind of neutral, not very bright. And then there is one more flower over there. I can see brightness over that flower, and at the same time actually I see some redder than greener here. So I'm going to add a tiny bit of terra rosa, more terra rosa than I added to some other flowers. And then there is another flower here that just goes into background. Again, I have to hold the shape of my balls, and at the same time I need to make sure they will look like flowers. So there are some green leaves in there, so for that I'm going to use some viridian and some transparent oxide red and very dark green. So there is one leaf here, adding a little bit of transparent oxide red because it's very warm in there in between flowers. I tried to break it with greens, but the flowers are so big that they kind of cover the leaves. The only one that I had is the stem of this one, really. So just indicate the shadow over there. So I think if I do a little bit more background, then I could bring the brightness to my flowers. So I'm going just to mix whatever I had here when I started doing background. So it's a little bit cool on this side, so I'm adding ultramarine to my mixture of white, ultramarine and well, I will just call it simple because it doesn't matter which. It's blue, brown and white, so it's ultramarine, transparent red oxide and white. So, and then I will do variations of that one. There are areas where it's completely like almost like white because I have light background, but because light absorbs so much yellow in it, some of them are really some of those folders of material are very yellow because of the reflection of the yellow flowers. So we'll see how it goes. And I'm using linen this time. It's linen. I just mounted on the cardboard, and sometimes it's easier for me like to store them as well. And if someone likes this flower, or sorry, this painting, and wants to buy it, let's say, it's easy to mount it on the I call it MDF boards. So, or sometimes I prepare canvases already mounted on the frames, so it depends. I'm using that, put my brush in the wrong color, a scary color, Prussian blue. So I'm going to wipe it a little and keep going with this background. So it's kind of a mix of blue and brown, but it gets warmer when it gets to flowers, closer to flowers. And the good thing about big brush, you can really go fast with it, or at least a little faster. So I have a lot of light here, lighter colors. I think I'm going to add even more white. It looks much lighter, so around this flower. So, and I can easy paint over it. I'm trying to make it thinner, but I think it's a little bit thicker than I would have it. So there is shadow, cast shadow from this flower that I'm going to keep in there. Used some old paints again, so that's my nature. Can't throw away paints. Sometimes hits me back because I'm trying to save paints, but I'm just trying to minimize the waste for myself, for environment, and it saves money as well, I guess, depending on what painting, of course. If it's trial painting like this or demo, you can use any leftover paints. If you do a commission or something, you don't want to do that. Don't want to leave this for people. So I'm going to make a little bit of lighter area here. But again, because it's a white material, lots of it, it's just a play of different tints of colors. And I'm adding some worms, so I added cadmium deep to this area. Maybe it's a little bit, of course, warm, too warm. So go back to the darker color. Go back to, oh, that's what happens when you don't wash your brush, so just sometimes you get carried away and forget about it. So I'm going to use this for my shadows. I'm going to using lots of white here, so just trying to look at the cast shadow of the other flowers. So there is some whites here, but then the rest is going to be in the dark. So whatever is white, kind of goes like this with a curve. And then I'm adding a little bit more of shadows, trying not to overdo them as I did before. So a little bit of yellow ochre, a little bit of burnt sienna, just a little bit of warmer, darker color that I see here. Going cast shadow from the jug and goes this way. Sometimes the play of shadows could be interesting to paint as well. So it goes here, goes more on this reflection of this flower. Sorry, not reflection, the cast shadow. Yeah, so, and then again going with the lighter color. Where needed. Something like this. Don't want to emphasize it a lot. So maybe I'll do some brighter reflections. Oh, sorry, reflections. Some lighter stripes of light with common material. And then at the same time looking for the darker yellow ones. This one goes a little bit darker in this area. Tempted to add too much yellow, but I shouldn't. So there is like gold here. I'll use some of that mixture I had. So there's some yellow coming from flowers and a little bit here.